Welcome to Mocha Wave Talks, episode 2. Here at Mocha Wave Publishing, we believe that every girl who reads has her own magic. I truly believe that. And joining me today is author Tirzah Darnell. Her book is coming out. I think it's for release in
August
2023. Really excited about that. Some of you who have been following Mocha Wave Publishing on Facebook may know of our kind of ongoing rivalry, fun, kind of. But really, we sort of get along most of the time.
We have some things in common,
but there are some things that I think that really make us different too, which is a good thing. And that's one of the things I wanted us to face off about, is just to talk about some of the things that I see one way, she sees another way, and maybe all of you have a different opinion. This is not about us trying to say that we are right and you're wrong. This is just us kind of talking and seeing kind of what we can come up with. Maybe there's some ideas, and maybe you can share some ideas too in the comments. Love to hear from you. All right, so one of the things that makes us very different as writers, I consider myself a pantser, right? And that's one thing, the term that I've heard a lot is planning versus pantsing. Pantsing kind of meaning like you're writing by the seat of your pants, and planning, you're thinking it out and planning it, and before you even get to where you're putting words on paper, right?
Yeah.
So I see myself as a pantser. I do a little bit of planning, because I have to think up my ideas, but after a while my characters start talking to me. I get to the paper, I feel my emotions, my sensory on, all of that imagery, all of that coming and exploding in my head, and I just gotta get it down on paper and see what happens. What are some of the techniques you use? Because
I have to do a lot of planning in order to even be able to get down and write, because if I don't have an idea of where I'm going, what's happening in my story, well, this is sci-fi, space opera, there's a lot going on, it's a big world, and if I don't know where I'm going, I will get lost in that world. So I do a lot of planning. I have almost up to book 3, at least as a basic outline of what's going to happen in these books. So I think that we are a little bit different that way. There are moments of pantsing where all of a sudden I get an idea as I'm writing, and just it comes forth, and I just can't ignore it. I have to put it down. But a lot of this, we've got big world here, a lot of different planets, a lot of different technology. So it takes a lot of planning ahead of time for something like that, at least for me.
do you think that the genre has something to do with it, or do you think it's just kind of like what I am as a writer, what you are as a writer?
Well, I do know that there's a lot of people in a lot of different genres that are pantsers, because you also have big worlds too.
That is true.
That you need to keep track of.
Yeah.
And I think that if you don't do your planning ahead of time, you many times have to do it afterwards, because you have to go through and make sure that you kept everything in line with what you said earlier. You have to do a lot of kind of cleanup afterwards, I think.
Yeah.
I think that seems that way to me.
Yeah, it's kind of like, do I want to do the cleanup at the beginning, or do I want to do it afterwards?
Yes.
Yeah, so you're right that fantasy, it's both sci-fi and fantasy. It's about world building.
Big worlds.
And sometimes worlds kind of explode all of a sudden magically, and sometimes worlds are created, like the Death Star, built by humans.
But it took many days to plan out that Death Star.
How many, what do they call them? Parsecs or light years, or whatever, measure time in Star Wars. We both are big Star Wars fans and Dragon fans and Sherlock Holmes fans, as you probably see here in my ocean room. So we talked about the different techniques. What about genres? Because one of my readers actually was asking a question like, how do I tell what genre is my book? And so the two genres that we're really focused on right now are fantasy and sci-fi, right? You're looking at sci-fi, I'm looking at fantasy. And so what are some of the things do you think that target that or label that as like a fiction, as fantasy, or as sci-fi? What are some of the things that you think?
Well, with sci-fi and fantasy, I think a big difference we see there is in the focus. So as fantasy, we're focusing more on magic, with sci-fi, we're focusing more on technology, even though there can be some blurring between those two,
Right.
because we can see that, I mean, technology can be almost like magic to certain people.
Could be a god, right?
Yes.
Like a supernatural power, like technology is the god.
And like with sci-fi, we can go farther than we here in our world at this moment in time go with technology. We can take it to the extreme. And that's what you see a lot is technology, sci-fi, we're trying to come to terms with the unknown of technology. Can it be something that will help humanity, or could it be something that will harm humanity?
And I think that's interesting because, like I said, we're big Star Wars fans and Godzilla fans and Sherlock Holmes fans. But one of the things that I think about with that is that, like Star Wars, we have the Force, which is the supernatural, and it's kind of a fantasy almost, even though it's labeled as sci-fi.
Yeah, it kind of overlaps those.
Yeah,
Which
the what they call them, the space wizards, they call the Jedi.
And like that's one of the things that made Star Wars so such a powerful series is we have both of those. So this series could go anywhere in they could take it anywhere because you can do anything with technology, you can do anything with magic. So they could have taken it to really big extremes as far as their imagination would take them.
Right. So what is too far? Like if I said, okay, had people tell me it's your world, do whatever you want with it, right?
Well, when you defy believability, you have to be able to convince your reader that that could have happened.
Okay, so in this world, I had to create something in that world.
Yeah.
Okay, that would make it likely that could happen, or probable that could happen. So what are some of the things that differentiate, like themes we talked about, coming to terms with technology, like with fantasy, what am I trying to do? Like, am I trying to come to terms with magic? Am I trying to see what magic can do?
Kind of like the supernatural. Yeah, because the supernatural is something that humans, I mean, you have to acknowledge that there is some kind of supernatural thing going on. It's whether we're on it, it's just supernatural because we can't explain it because we haven't explored it further. But magic and supernatural is something that people still need to come to terms with. Whereas like horror, we're coming to terms with something as humans, we have to face the inevitable that we're all going to die sometime. And so that's the
fear of death.
Yeah, so we're trying to get people comfortable and understand and come to terms with that.
Like what would happen if also this horrible thing happened?
And so something that's me as a disaster resilience I wouldn't say expert, but interested in that sort of thing. Disasters.
Yeah, I think that you're right, that your knowledge of history and government and disaster resilience has really helped you, because I think sci-fi especially, well, maybe both of them, I'm curious to hear what you think. Sci-fi is very much interested in the development of society and how society is going to react as a whole to whether the world, gets more positive, becomes more utopian, or whether it gets to be more what they call dystopian, right?
Yeah, and my story is we're looking at the planet of darkness, which is like a dystopian world, and then the planet of light, which is more of a utopian world. So we're seeing that dystopia versus utopia and understanding what makes a world more dystopian and more utopian, and the conflict between the two.
The conflict, that's an interesting point.
Yeah, you gotta have conflict in any story, whatever it is.
Yeah, there's gonna be a problem. You're trying to solve this problem, and sometimes you really need to narrow that down, especially when you're a pantser like me and you think, okay, I got this going, I got that going. What's the main focus? What are my characters really trying to accomplish? And I think one of the things that really helped tie my book together was the dragons. I think that, and that's kind of interesting. You're like, okay, I can bring dragons, vampires, werewolves, and things like that in my stories. And yet, like I have this universal horror collection, and it has, the vampire, it has the werewolf movies. So at what point does this fantasy, it's no longer horror, it's now fantasy? What do you think is and I hate to put you on the spot with this question, because I know we didn't discuss this, it just popped in my head. But what point do you feel like we go from horror and becomes more like fantasy?
I think the point is, your focus is on Betty Calvin, who's a very powerful woman, young girl that is learning her skill, and she is somebody who can create a sense out of chaos. And she is the main character, so we're following her. If we were following totally focused on Edmund and the vampire, the Tepov, and she was not there, I think it would be more of a horror.
Especially if it didn't end up too well for Edmund, right?
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden,
I don't want to give any spoilers because we don't know what happens to Edmund, okay? But it's not as bad as a horror movie.
no. Yes, and we do have this stability here with this girl.
Like I know a lot of people were really shocked when they watched the Harry Potter movies, and actually some of the characters they came to love actually perished. And so that was a big shock. We don't expect that to happen in a fantasy world. We think, okay, some supernatural thing is going to come along and bring them back to life or make them all better.
And I think it's I was thinking about earlier, is it's the readers that decide what the genre is. You read it, and if it sounds more horror to you than fantasy, then you could label that as that. But another thing is, there are darker sides and lighter sides of any kind of genre too. A darker fantasy or lighter fantasy.
Yeah, and there's actually, I think, a subgenre of dark fantasy.
Yes.
And see, some people have called my book, I thought, I was a little surprised they called it dark fantasy, but I guess it makes sense because it does deal with
those elements of horror.
Yeah. And it has the vampires, it has the werewolf, and it has some scary things happening.
Yeah.
But all in all, we hope that good will triumph over the evil.
And we do have this girl that is the major focus.
Yes, and I think that was one of the turning points when I was pantsing, going back to that term. First I was pantsing along, and I thought, okay, I'm going to make the main character Edmund. Edmund was my main character, and it was just going to be a retelling of Dracula. And I thought, I always wanted to do a werewolf story, so let me go ahead and do a werewolf story. And I love that idea of that werewolves where they have that regret, like that Lon Chaney Jr., where he's like, oh, I can't believe I killed, I don't want to kill, that whole pain and the suffering they have after what they've done, that regret. And then, that hurt sort of thing. They want to love somebody, but they can't because they're afraid they'll hurt that person. So I just really loved that. But then as I was working on it, I was like, I'm not connecting with Edmund as much as I thought I would. I wanted to see a powerful girl come. What would happen if a girl came in here and fixed things? So that's when Betty was born, right?
And that's what really makes that story.
I think so too.
So I recommend that even if you're not a skilled artist, draw out some of the sets so that you know where everything is located. That makes it much easier as you're writing when they're in this locale, because locale is important in sci-fi.
Yes, and I think that is something that I learned from you when you were telling me, like, you were writing these action scenes. I was reading it. I saw how you did a really good job of using the environment to really make that believable, that action. And I saw that, I was thinking of you when I was watching Moon Knight, on Disney Plus, because I was thinking, oh, look, we had this female, right, this character, and she's very powerful, and she's like, oh, here's a bottle, let me grab the bottle, here's my backpack, let me grab my backpack. So everything that was around her, this car was already there, toppling over. So everything in the set was playing a part in that. I think it was one of the last episodes, where she got her wings and she was all powerful. So I was like, wow, you did a good job with that.
Because environment is so important that as a reader, I've heard authors say that if you don't describe the environment, the readers, all they're going to see is white in the background.
Yes, so like what they call that, the limbo set.
Yeah, a limbo set with nothing there, and it's important that you feel like that character is right there in that environment, so that they both go together to move the action along, the character and the set. Yeah,
and I think that's going to be important because, like, in sci-fi, you're going to have your space and your technology and your characters trying to overcome some kind of horrible thing that's coming with technology.
Mhm.
Whereas with the fantasy, it's where like the characters are still in that world. Like, what can we do in Neverland?
Yeah, and
Right? What can we
you
do
did a
in
beautiful job of describing the environment too, and having the characters interact with that environment. So I mean, when you get that water ghoul coming in there, that's
Ocean Room? Wonder where that came from.
but they do a good job of interacting with that environment.
Okay, well, thank you. I really enjoy that. I'm a very sensory person. I like the smell, I like the taste, I like to experiment things like tea. I like different teas, different candles.
I think that's a good skill for authors to have.
Yeah, I think that helps. I think, again, we just sparking some conversation. You all may have different ideas, different things that we've made you think about as we were just kind of talking back and forth and sharing some of our own experiences as we're writing. And again, rivals, but not really rivals, just sort of sometimes rivals,
Yeah,
kind of rivals. I do have,
there's a competition going on though.
yes. But again, thank you so much for following us at Mocha Wave Talks and for following Resilient Moon Creative and seeing what wonderful things come from there and what things are coming up with
Yeah.
the Mocha Wave Talks.